Welcome to the InnoGuide Podcast, where we share the works of authors and mentors to guide innovation. In this episode, number 39, we'll be sharing Part 2 of Think Again by Adam Grant. Chapter 7. Vaccine Whisperers and Mild-Mannered Interrogators. How the right kind of listening motivates people to change. Let me tell you about Marie-Hélène Etienne Rousseau, a mother of 4 from Quebec. In 2018, her youngest son Toby was born 3 months premature, weighing just 2 pounds. He spent 5 months in the neonatal intensive care unit fighting for his life. Like many parents in her community, Marie-Hélène hadn't vaccinated her children. It wasn't the norm where she lived, and she'd heard countless horror stories about vaccines. But as Toby prepared to leave the hospital, still fragile and vulnerable, a nurse called in a vaccine whisperer to speak with her. This doctor didn't preach, prosecute, or pressure her. Instead, he listened. He asked open-ended questions, acknowledged her concerns, and respected her autonomy. By the end of their conversation, Marie-Hélène decided to vaccinate Toby and later her other children. This chapter is about the power of listening to help people rethink their beliefs. Whether it's convincing a parent to vaccinate their child, helping someone overcome an addiction, or even persuading a warlord to consider peace, the right kind of listening can open minds and motivate change. When it comes to changing mind, our first instinct is often to bombard people with facts or argue against their beliefs. But this approach often backfires. Research shows that when people feel attacked or pressured, they dig in their heels. The psychological immune system kicks in, fortifying their beliefs and making them even more resistant to change. For example, public health campaigns about the dangers of measles or the safety of vaccines have often failed to sway vaccine-hesitant parents. In some cases, these campaigns even made people more skeptical. Why? Because refuting someone's beliefs can feel like an attack on their identity, triggering defensiveness rather than curiosity. In the 1980s, clinical psychologist Bill Miller developed a new approach called motivational interviewing. Instead of trying to persuade people to change, motivational interviewing helps them find their own reasons for change. It's based on 3 key techniques. 1. Asking open-ended questions. This encourages people to reflect on their beliefs and motivations. 2. Engaging in reflective listening. This shows empathy and helps people feel heard. And 3. Affirming the person's autonomy. This reinforces their ability to make their own decisions. The goal is to hold up a mirror so people can see themselves more clearly and start a rethinking cycle. Instead of telling them what to do, you guide them to discover their own motivations for change. With respect to the vaccine whisperer, this approach was exactly what the vaccine whisperer, Dr. Arnaud Gagné, used with Marie-Hélène. He didn't judge her for not vaccinating her children or try to force her to change her mind. Instead, he asked her about her concerns and listened carefully to her answers. He acknowledged that the world is full of conflicting information about vaccines and respected her desire to do what was best for her kids. When Marie-Hélène asked questions, Arnaud shared evidence about vaccine safety, but only after gaining her permission. He wasn't delivering a lecture, he was having a conversation. By the end of their discussion, Marie-Hélène felt respected and empowered to make her own decision. This approach didn't just change her mind, it changed her behavior. She vaccinated Toby, her older children, and even encouraged her sister-in-law to do the same. The science of motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing has been used successfully in a wide range of settings, from addiction treatment to conflict resolution. Studies show that it has a meaningful effect on behavior change in about 3/4 of the cases. It's been used to help people quit smoking, lose weight, improve their diets, and even address climate change. One of the reasons it works is that it avoids the righting reflex, spelled R-I-G-H-T-I-N-G, the righting reflex, the urge to fix people's problems or tell them what to do. Instead, it focuses on helping people explore their own motivations and make their own decisions. Listening is at the heart of motivational interviewing. But listening well is more than just staying quiet while someone else talks. It's about asking thoughtful questions, showing genuine curiosity, and creating a safe space for people to express themselves. For example, Betty Bignobi, a Ugandan politician, used listening to open the mind of Joseph Kony, the leader of the Lord's Resistance Army. Kony and his rebels were responsible for horrific violence, but Betty managed to start peace talks by sitting down with displaced Ugandans, listening to their grievances, and showing them respect. Her approach earned her the trust of Kony's followers and even Kony himself, who began calling her Mummy. Great listeners have what E.M. Forrester called inverse charisma. Instead of trying to impress others, they make others feel smart, valued, and understood. This kind of listening can reduce defensiveness, encourage self-reflection, and open the door to change. For example, when Arnaud listened to Marie-Helene's concern about vaccines, he wasn't just gathering information, he was building trust. By showing that he cared about her and her children, he created a space where she felt safe to rethink her beliefs. Motivational interviewing isn't just a technique for doctors, therapists, or negotiators. It's a skill we can all use in our everyday lives. Whether we're helping a friend make a tough decision, resolving a conflict at work, or trying to change someone's mind, the key is to listen with humility and curiosity. When we stop trying to preach or prosecute and start listening instead, we don't just help others rethink their beliefs, we might find ourselves rethinking our own. After all, the best way to open someone else's mind is to start by opening our own. Think Again, Part 3 of the book, Collective Rethinking, Creating Communities of Lifelong Learner. Chapter 8, Charged Conversations. Depolarizing our divided discussions. Let's start with a question. How would you feel about sitting down with a stranger who completely disagrees with you on a hot-button issue like abortion, immigration, or climate change? If you're up for the challenge, you might want to visit the Difficult Conversations Lab at Columbia University. Here, psychologist Peter T. Coleman has spent decades studying how to turn polarizing debates into productive discussions. In one of his experiments, participants were paired with someone who held opposing views on abortion. Before their conversation, they were given an article about gun control to read. The twist is some participants read a version of the article that presented the issue as a black and white debate between two sides, while others read a version that framed gun control as a complex issue with many perspectives. The results were striking. When the article presented the issue as complex, 100% of the pairs were able to find common ground on abortion and draft a joint statement. This experiment highlights a key insight. When we approach divisive issues with a mindset of complexity rather than simplicity, we're more likely to rethink our own views and find common ground with others. The problem with binary thinking. One of the biggest obstacles to productive conversations is what psychologists call binary bias, our tendency to oversimplify complex issues into two opposing sides. Think of it as the mental shortcut that divides the world into us versus them. Right versus wrong, good versus bad. Binary bias is everywhere, from social media to political debates. It's why we often see issues like gun control or climate change framed as battles between two extremes. But this kind of framing doesn't just fail to change minds, it actually deepens polarization. When we're presented with two starkly opposing sides, we're more likely to dig in our heels and defend our own position. The power of complexity. The antidote to binary bias is complexifying, acknowledging the shades of gray in an issue and exploring the full spectrum of perspectives. When we embrace complexity, we disrupt overconfidence cycles and open the door to rethinking. In Peter Coleman's experiment, the complexified version of the gun control article didn't just help participants find common ground on abortion, it also made them more open to rethinking their views on other divisive issues like affirmative action and the death penalty. They asked more questions, made fewer assertions, and focused more on shared values than on their own opinions. This approach has profound implications for how we communicate about polarizing topics. Whether we're discussing politics, climate change, or social justice, presenting issues as complex rather than binary can lead to more productive conversations and better solutions. Climate change and the challenge of nuance. Let's take climate change as an example. For years, activists like Al Gore have framed the issue as a battle between the believers and the deniers. While this approach has mobilized some people, it has also alienated others. Binary framing makes it easy for people to disengage or dismiss the problem, especially when they feel pressured to pick a side. But the reality is far more nuanced. Polls show that Americans' views on climate change fall into at least 6 categories, ranging from alarmed to dismissive. By acknowledging this spectrum, we can move beyond the false dichotomy of believers versus deniers and focus on finding solutions that resonate with people across the spectrum. For example, conservatives are more likely to support climate action when it's framed as an opportunity for innovation and economic growth, rather than as a restriction on emissions. By highlighting the complexity of the issue and offering a broad range of solutions, we can make progress without forcing people into binary camps. What about the role of emotions in charged conversations? Another common piece of advice for navigating polarizing discussions is to leave emotions out of it. But research shows that emotions can actually play a constructive role if we embrace their complexity. In Peter Coleman's lab, productive conversations were marked by a wide range of emotions. Participants might feel angry one moment, curious the next, and even excited about considering a new perspective. The emotional variety helped them stay engaged and open to rethinking. By contrast, unproductive conversations were dominated by a narrow range of emotions like anger or frustration. When we get stuck in emotional simplicity, it's harder to see the nuances in an issue or in the person we're talking to. Perspective seeking, not perspective taking. One of the most common suggestions for bridging divides is to put yourself in the other person's shoes. But research shows that perspective taking often backfires. When we try to imagine someone else's thoughts or feeling, we're usually just guessing, and we often get it wrong. A better approach is perspective seeking, actually talking to people and asking them about their views. This is what good scientists do. They test their hypotheses by gathering data rather than making assumptions. For example, when Christian Cooper, a black man, was falsely accused by a white woman in Central Park, he responded with remarkable nuance. Instead of labeling her as a racist, he acknowledged the complexity of the situation and encouraged her to reflect on her actions. His response invited others to rethink their own reactions and consider the broader dynamics of systemic racism. Charged conversations cry out for nuance. Whether we're discussing politics, social issues, or personal conflicts, the key to depolarizing our discussions is to resist the urge to simplify. This doesn't mean we have to agree with everyone or abandon our principles. It means recognizing that most issues and most people are more complex than they seem. By embracing complexity, we can move beyond the us versus them mentality and create communities of lifelong learners who are open to rethinking. As Walt Whitman once wrote, "Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes." If we can learn to see the multitudes in ourselves and others, we might just find a way to bridge our divides. Chapter 9. Rewriting the Textbook. Teaching Students to Question Knowledge. Let me introduce you to Erin McCarthy, a history teacher in Milwaukee who's redefining what it means to teach. Erin didn't start out wanting to be a teacher. She loved history but found her own social studies classes dull and uninspiring. After working in museums and leading school tours, she realized that the enthusiasm students showed on field trips was missing in classrooms. Determined to change that, she became a teacher, and in 2020 she was named Wisconsin's Teacher of the Year. Erin's mission is simple but profound, to teach her students not to just learn history, but to question it. One day she assigned her 8th graders a reading from a 1940s history textbook. Some students accepted the information as fact, while others were shocked by the errors and omissions. This exercise opened their eyes to the idea that knowledge evolves over time and that history is often told from a limited perspective. To drive the point home, Erin created her own textbook section about middle school life today, but with a twist. All the protagonists were girls, and all the pronouns were female. When a boy raised his hand to ask why boys were missing, Erin replied, "Boys were around, they just weren't doing anything important." That moment helped the student understand what it feels like to be marginalized, a reality many groups have faced for centuries. Erin's final assignment is my favorite. She asked the students to rewrite a chapter of their history textbook, focusing on the underrepresented themes or perspectives. One group added the story of the original March on Washington in the 1940s, which inspired Martin Luther King Jr.'s march 2 decades later. Another group highlighted the contributions of Hispanic and Japanese American soldiers in World War II. These projects are light bulb moments, as Aaron calls them, where students realize they have the power to question and reshape the narratives they've been taught. Rethinking education. Erin's approach is a masterclass in rethinking. She doesn't just teach facts, she teaches her students how to think critically, questioning assumptions and embracing curiosity. And this isn't just for teachers. Whether you're a parent, mentor, or colleague, every time you help someone think again, you're engaging in a form of education. Unfortunately, traditional education often prioritizes memorization over critical thinking. Students are taught to absorb information rather than interrogate it. What if we flipped the script? What if we taught students to think like scientists, historians, or fact-checkers? For example, Stanford has developed a curriculum that encourages high school students to tackle questions like, what really caused the Spanish-American War? Or, what was the New Deal? Or, was the New Deal a success? The goal isn't to find the right answer, but to develop the skills to evaluate evidence, consider multiple perspectives, and argue productively. The dumbstruck effect. One of the biggest challenges in education is the over-reliance on lectures. Lectures can be captivating, but they often turn students into passive recipients of information rather than active thinkers. Research shows that while students may enjoy lectures more, they actually learn more from active learning methods like group problem solving and hands-on activities. This phenomenon is called the dumbstruck effect. When we're awed by a charismatic speaker, we're less likely to scrutinize their arguments or remember the content. Lectures may inspire us, but they don't always teach us how to think critically or rethink our assumptions. That's why active learning is so powerful. In one study, students in active learning STEM classes scored half a letter grade higher than those in lecture-based classes. They were also 1.5 times less likely to fail. Active learning requires more mental effort, but it leads to a deeper understanding and better long-term outcomes. One of the most inspiring educators I've encountered is Ron Berger, a former elementary school teacher and a carpenter. Ron's philosophy is simple. Excellence comes from constant revision. He teaches his students to embrace confusion, revise their work, and learn from feedback. For example, Ron's first graders created multiple drafts of a butterfly drawing, improving with each iteration. By the final draft, their work was stunning. Ron also turned his classroom into a challenge network, where students critiqued each other's work in a supportive, constructive way. They learned to give specific feedback, ask thoughtful questions, and continually raise the standards. Ron's approach isn't just about teaching facts, it's about teaching students how to learn. He encourages them to think like scientists, architects, and artists, tackling real-world problems and revising their ideas along the way. In my own teaching, I've tried to incorporate these principles. I assign my students projects that challenge conventional wisdom or question principles we've covered in class. For example, one group of students gave a mini TED Talk critiquing TED Talks, pointing out how they can oversimplify complex ideas. I've also started leaving parts of my syllabus blank, inviting students to design their own class sessions. One year, a student suggested writing letters to their freshman selves, reflecting on what they wish they'd known earlier. This exercise helped them rethink their academic, social, and career choices and inspired similar projects at other schools. Great teachers don't just introduce new ideas, they introduce new ways of thinking. They help us develop the habits of curiosity, humility, and critical thinking that we need to navigate a complex world. Whether you're teaching a classroom of students or mentoring a colleague, you have the opportunity to inspire rethinking. By encouraging others to question their assumptions, revise their ideas, and embrace the joy of discovery, you're not just teaching them to learn, you're teaching them to keep learning. As Ron Berger's students learn, excellence isn't about getting it right the first time. It's about revising, reworking, and constantly improving. And that's a lesson we can all take to heart. Chapter 10. That's not the way we've always done it. Building cultures of learning at work. Let me take you to outer space, literally. In 2013, astronaut Luca Parmitano experienced what NASA would later call the scariest wardrobe malfunction in its history. During a spacewalk, water began leaking into Luca's helmet, covering his eyes, filling his nostrils, and cutting off his communication. He was in grave danger of drowning in space. Using his memory and tether, Luca managed to navigate back to the airlock where he waited in silence for what felt like an eternity before his helmet could be removed. The technical issue was traced to a faulty fan pump separator, and NASA quickly made updates to the spacesuit, but the real problem wasn't technical, it was human. A week earlier, Luca had noticed water droplets in his helmet after his first spacewalk. The team assumed it was a minor issue with the drinking water bag, a problem they'd seen before. No one dug deeper. This wasn't the first time NASA's failure to rethink assumptions had led to disaster. In 1986, the Challenger exploded because engineers ignored warnings about the O-ring failures. In 2003, Columbia disintegrated after foam damage was dismissed as inconsequential. In both cases, NASA's culture of overconfidence and reliance on past successes prevented them from questioning their assumptions. The difference between performance and learning cultures. NASA's struggles highlight a critical distinction between two types of organizational cultures. Performance cultures prioritize results and execution. While this can drive excellence, it often leads to overconfidence cycles where success blinds people to potential risks. Learning cultures prioritize growth, curiosity, and rethinking. In these cultures, people are encouraged to question assumptions, admit mistakes, and explore new possibilities. Research shows that learning cultures lead to more innovation and fewer mistakes, but creating such a culture requires two key ingredients: psychological safety and accountability. Psychological safety is the belief that you can take risks, admit mistakes, and voice concerns without fear of punishment. It's not about being nice or lowering standards, it's about fostering trust and openness. Amy Edmondson, a management professor, discovered the importance of psychological safety while studying medical teams. At first, she found that teams with high psychological safety reported more errors. But when she dug deeper, she realized these teams weren't making more mistakes, they were just more willing to admit them. This openness allowed them to learn from their errors and prevent future ones. At NASA, a lack of psychological safety contributed to the Challenger and Columbia disasters. Engineers who raised concerns were ignored or silenced, and others stayed quiet out of fear. Ellen Ochoa, the first Latin astronaut and later director of the Johnson Space Center, recognized this problem. She began carrying a note card with questions like, "What are the uncertainties in your analysis?" and "What might happen if you're wrong?" These questions encouraged her team to rethink their assumptions and speak up. Accountability. Rethinking best practices. While psychological safety is essential, it's not enough on its own. Without accountability, people may feel safe but lack the motivation to question authority or challenge the status quo. One of the biggest obstacles to learning the concept of best practices. One of the biggest obstacles to learning is the concept of best practices. Once a routine is labeled as best, it often becomes frozen in time. People stop questioning its flaws or looking for ways to improve it. At NASA, this mindset led to complacency. Successes were celebrated without examining the faulty processes that could jeopardize future missions. To counter this, organizations need to focus on process accountability, evaluating the quality of decision-making, not just the outcomes. For example, Amazon requires teams to write 6-page memos outlining the problem, past approaches, and proposed solutions. These memos are read silently at the start of meetings to avoid groupthink and to ensure thorough discussion. Process accountability encourages deep thinking and rethinking even when decisions are inconsequential or reversible. It's about creating a culture where experiments are welcomed and rethinking becomes routine. The role of leadership in building learning cultures. Leaders play a crucial role in fostering psychological safety and accountability. At the Gates Foundation, for example, employees were intimidated by Bill Gates' vast knowledge and feared making mistakes. To address this, the foundation worked to normalize vulnerability. One memorable initiative was inspired by the Mean Tweets segment on Jimmy Kimmel Live. Melinda Gates volunteered to read harsh employee feedback on camera, reacting with humor and humility. This act of vulnerability inspired employees to open up about their own struggles and share feedback more freely. Research shows that when leaders admit their imperfections and share their development goals, it creates a ripple effect. Teams feel more comfortable taking risks, offering constructive criticism, and embracing a learning mindset. Rethinking at NASA, a case study. After the Columbia disaster, NASA began shifting toward a learning culture. In 2006, during a countdown for a shuttle launch, a problem with the sensors emerged. The mission management team voted overwhelmingly to proceed, but Ellen Ochoa voted no. In the past, Ellen might have been afraid to speak up, but in the emerging learning culture, it was her responsibility to voice her concerns. The launch was delayed, and further investigation revealed a faulty connection between the sensors and the computers. This decision likely prevented another disaster. Ellen's willingness to rethink the majority opinion inspired others at NASA to do the same. By the time she retired in 2018, NASA had completed 19 consecutive successful shuttle missions. Rethinking isn't just an individual skill, it's a collective capability that depends on an organization's culture. To build a culture of learning, we need to 1. Foster psychological safety. Create an environment where people feel safe to admit mistakes, ask questions, and challenge authority. 2. Encourage process accountability. Evaluate the quality of decision-making, not just the outcomes. And 3. Rethink best practices. Treat them as starting points, not endpoints, and remain curious about how they can be improved. As Ellen Ochoa's story shows, rethinking can save lives, but it can also lead to better decisions, stronger teams, and more innovative organizations. The key is to make rethinking a habit, not just in moments of crisis, but every day. After all, the status quo is only as good as its ability to guide us toward a better future. If we want to keep learning and growing, we need to keep asking, how do we know? And what if we're wrong? That's how we build cultures of learning at work, in space, and beyond. Part 4, Conclusion. Chapter 11, Escaping Tunnel Vision. Reconsidering our best-laid career and life plans. What do you want to be when you grow up? For me, that was the most dreaded question as a kid. Adults always asked it, and no matter what I said, my answers never seemed to satisfy them. First, I wanted to be a superhero. Cue the laughter. Then I dreamed of making it to the NBA, but after being cut from middle school basketball tryouts 3 years in a row, that dream fizzled. In high school, I became obsessed with springboard diving and thought I'd become a diving coach. Adults scoffed at that too, saying I was aiming too low. By the time I got to college, I settled on psychology, but even then, I wasn't sure where it would lead. I envied people who had a clear path for their lives. Take my cousin Ryan, for example. From kindergarten, he knew he wanted to be a doctor. It wasn't just his dream, it was the family dream. Our grandparents, who had emigrated from Russia and worked tirelessly to make ends meet, hoped one of us would bring the prestige of an MD to the family. Ryan was the chosen one. He was smart, hardworking, and determined. He set his sights on becoming a neurosurgeon and never wavered. But as Ryan progressed through his medical training, cracks began to show. He burned out during his grueling residency, questioning whether he could keep going. Yet, he felt he had come too far to quit. He finished his 7-year residency, added an 8th-year fellowship, and became a neurosurgeon. Today, he's still paying off student loans, and while he enjoys helping patients, the long hours and bureaucracy have drained much of his enthusiasm. If he could do it all over again, he said he would have chosen a different path. Ryan's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of tunnel vision. We all have ideas about who we want to be and how we want to live, but these plans can blind us to alternative possibilities. Life changes, and so do we. Locking onto a single goal can lead us in the wrong direction. The trap of escalation and identity foreclosure. When a plan isn't working, our instinct is often to double down rather than rethink. This is called escalation of commitment. It's why entrepreneurs stick with failing strategies, NBA teams keep investing in draft busts, and politicians prolong unnecessary wars. We rationalize our decisions to protect our egos and avoid admitting we were wrong. Ironically, one of the biggest drivers of escalation is grit. While grit, passion, and perseverance can help us achieve long-term goals, it also has a dark side. Greedy people are more likely to persist in tasks where success is impossible, and research suggests that overly determined mountaineers are more likely to die on expeditions because they refuse to turn back. Sometimes the best kind of grit is knowing when to quit. Ryan's persistence was admirable, but it also trapped him in a cycle of identity foreclosure. This happens when we settle too early on a sense of self, closing our minds to alternative paths. For Ryan, being a neurosurgeon became part of his identity, making it nearly impossible to walk away, even when it no longer felt right. The problem often starts in childhood when adults ask kids what they want to be when they grow up. This question fosters a fixed mindset, as if growing up is a finite process and we're supposed to become one thing forever. Instead, kids should be encouraged to think of careers as actions they take, not identities they must claim. The power of career and life checkups. To avoid getting stuck in outdated plans, we need to schedule regular checkups, just like we do at doctors or dentists. Twice a year, ask yourself, when did I form the aspirations I'm currently pursuing, and how have I changed since then? Have I reached a learning plateau in my role or workplace? Is it time to pivot? One of my students, Marissa, used this approach to rethink her career. After climbing the ladder at a prestigious consulting firm, she realized she had hit a learning and lifestyle plateau. Instead of staying the course, she decided to pursue a doctorate in management. Making a career change can be daunting, but management professor Hermina Ibarra offers a helpful framework. 1. Entertain possible selves. Identify people you admire and observe what they do. 2. Develop hypotheses. Consider how these paths align with your interests, skills, and values. And 3. Run experiments. Try informational interviews, job shadowing, or small projects to test the waters. The scientific approach to career transitions keeps you open to rethinking and discovering new possibilities. Rethinking relationships. Checkups aren't just for careers. They're essential for relationships, too. One of my former students called me in for advice about his girlfriend. She didn't match the ambitious, driven partner he had always imagined for himself, and he was questioning whether they were right for each other. I asked him when he had formed that vision of a partner. He realized it dated back to his teenage years and no longer reflected who he was or what he valued. After rethinking his expectations, he opened up to his girlfriend, and they discovered they had both been holding on to outdated ideas about who their partner should be. They let go of those preconceived notions, and their relationship flourished. Today, they're engaged. Successful relationships require constant rethinking. Psychologists find that annual relationship checkups improve satisfaction in married couples. Whether it's reconsidering small habits or making big life changes, staying open to growth allows relationships to evolve. The pursuit of meaning over happiness. When planning our lives, we often prioritize happiness, but research shows that chasing happiness can backfire. The more we value happiness, the less happy we often feel. Why? Because we get so busy evaluating our lives that we forget to actually live them. Instead of chasing happiness, we should focus on meaning. Meaning comes from actions that benefit others and align with our values. For example, one of my students considered transferring to a different college to find a happier environment. Instead, she decided to rethink how she spent her time. She started hosting weekly tea gatherings, building a micro-community that brought her joy and connection. Happiness is fleeting, but meaning lasts. It's not about where we are, it's about what we do. Final thoughts in this chapter: rethinking as a way of life. At work and in life, the best plans are flexible. Instead of locking onto a single goal, focus on what you want to learn and contribute in the next year or two. Stay open to new possibilities and be willing to adjust your course. Even small changes can make a big difference. My colleagues Amy Resnowski and Jane Dutton studied hospital custodians who rethought their roles. One custodian rearranged paintings in the long-term care unit, hoping to spark awareness in comatose patients. Another brought humor and comfort to cancer patients, calling the chemotherapy center the House of Hope. These small acts of job crafting gave their work deeper meaning. Rethinking isn't just about updating our knowledge, it's about leading a more fulfilling life. It takes humility to question our past decisions, doubt to challenge our present choices, and curiosity to imagine new futures. When we embrace rethinking, we free ourselves from the constraints of our old plans and open the door to growth, meaning, and joy. Epilogue. What I believe is a process rather than a finality. When it comes to fiction, I've always loved the conclusion. Whether it's the twist at the end of the Ender's Game or the wrestling game, the final moments transform the story, making me rethink everything I've read. But when it comes to writing about ideas, I've never liked conclusions. They feel too final, too closed. If a topic is important enough to fill an entire book, shouldn't it remain open-ended? That's the challenge with Think Again. I don't want this epilogue to bring closure. I want it to be a springboard for new thoughts and conversations. Initially, I even considered leaving this page blank to symbolize openness. But my challenge network, those trusted people who pushed me to rethink, convinced me otherwise. They suggested I use this space to reflect on my own rethinking process and share how my ideas evolved while writing this book. Rethinking. One of the first moments of rethinking came during the fact-checking process. I had written in Chapter 1 about the T-Rex being feathered, only to learn that scientists now believe it was mostly covered in scales. While that might disappoint some readers, there's good news. Another tyrannosaur, the Vudaranus, likely had vibrant feathers. This discovery reminded me of the joy of being wrong. It's an opportunity to learn something new. I've also been rethinking how rethinking happens. For much of human history, knowledge was passed down orally, like a giant game of telephone. By the time an idea traveled across a land, it could be completely reimagined. Today, we can track changes in knowledge more easily. Think of Wikipedia's edit history. But that doesn't mean we're more open-minded. Edit wars show how resistant people can be to admitting they're wrong. Max Planck famously said that new scientific truths don't triumph by convincing opponents, but because those opponents eventually die. For a long time, I believed that too, but I've come to see that we don't have to wait for generational change. We all have the capacity to think again. We just don't use it often enough because we don't think like scientists often enough. The dilemmas of rethinking. As I reflect on rethinking, 3 key dilemmas stand out. 1. What to rethink? It's easy to question our small assumptions, but what about core beliefs and sacred values? On one hand, we shouldn't abandon what's central to our identity too quickly. On the other hand, history shows that progress often comes from questioning settled science or deeply held beliefs. 2. When to rethink? Before making a decision, consider 2 questions. How high are the stakes? How reversible is the decision? If the stakes are low or the decision can be undone, act quickly. But if the stakes are high and the door will lock behind you, take the time to rethink up front. And 3, how much to rethink? Overthinking can lead to analysis paralysis, but underthinking is often worse. The key is to keep learning. If you're stuck pondering the same problem without gaining new insight, it's time to seek fresh information or consult your challenge network. The role of preaching, prosecuting, and politicking. While I've made the case for thinking like a scientist, I've been rethinking the roles of preaching, prosecuting, and politicking. These modes can be effective in certain situations, especially when persuading others. For example, preaching works when your audience is receptive to your viewpoint. Prosecuting can be effective with people who aren't determined to stay in control. And politicking can rally your tribe around shared goals. But the most powerful example of rethinking I found comes from Franklin Delano Roosevelt. During the Great Depression, FDR delivered a speech urging Americans to embrace bold, persistent experimentation. He didn't pretend to have all the answers. Instead, he encouraged trying new methods, admitting mistakes, and learning from them. This approach, rooted in confident humility, became a hallmark of his leadership. FDR's message feels just as relevant today. Complex problems like pandemics, climate change, and political polarization demand mental flexibility. In the face of uncertainty, humility, doubt, and curiosity are essential. Bold, persistent experimentation might be our best tool for rethinking. As I close this book, I am still rethinking. I wonder if I've devoted enough attention to when and how to use different modes of persuasion. I'm curious about how to better communicate confident humility, and I'm eager to see how these ideas evolve in the hands of readers like you. We can all improve our thinking again. Whatever conclusion you've reached, I hope this book inspires you to put on your scientist goggles a little more often. And if you disagree with me, I have just one question. What evidence would change your mind? Actions for impact. If you're looking to sharpen your rethinking skills, here are 30 practical takeaways to help you rethink as an individual, in your relationships, and within organizations. Note that this section is divided into 4 sections. Each has several subsections. So the first section is individual rethinking, which includes developing the habit of thinking again, calibrating your confidence, and inviting others to question your thinking. Section 2, interpersonal rethinking. The sections are ask better questions, approach disagreements as dances, not battles, Section 3 is collective rethinking. Sections are have more nuanced conversations, teach kids to think again, and create learning organizations. And the fourth section is just to stay open to rethinking the future. Section 1, individual rethinking. Develop the habit of thinking again. Number 1, think like a scientist. So this is one of 30. Think like a scientist. Treat your opinions as hypotheses to test, not truths to defend. Approach your ideas with curiosity and data, just like entrepreneurs who experiment with their strategies. 2, define your identity by values, not opinions. Instead of clinging to beliefs, anchor your identities in values like curiosity, learning, and flexibility. Keep a list of factors that could change your mind. 3, seek out opposing views. Burst your echo chamber by engaging with ideas that challenge your assumptions. Follow people who make you think, even if you disagree with them. B, calibrate your confidence. Number 4, be aware of Mount Stupid. Overconfidence can lead to stagnation. Reflect on how well you can explain a subject to avoid overestimating your competence. 5, harness doubt. Doubt isn't a weakness. It's a growth opportunity. Be confident in your ability to learn even as you question your current solutions. 6, celebrate being wrong. Mistakes are discoveries in disguise. Laugh at yourself and focus on improving rather than proving yourself. And C, invite others to question your thinking. So number 7, learn from everyone. Ask people what they've been rethinking lately or share times you've changed your mind. Everyone knows something you don't. 8, build a challenge network. Surround yourself with thoughtful critics who push you to think better. Let them know you value their dissent and where they add the most value. And 9, embrace constructive conflict. Frame disagreements as debates, not fights. Task conflict can spark better thinking as long as it's not personal. Section 2, interpersonal rethinking. A, ask better questions. So this is number 10 of 30. Practice persuasive listening. Listen more than you talk. Help others clarify their views and uncover their own reasons for change by asking thoughtful questions. 11, ask how, not why. Asking why can make people dig in their heels. Asking how forces them to think through the practicalities, often softening extreme views. 12, ask what evidence would change their mind. Instead of arguing, ask what it would take for them to reconsider, then work within their terms. 13, ask how they formed their opinion. Many beliefs are arbitrary. Prompt people to reflect how their views might differ if they'd grown up in a different time or place. B, approach disagreements as dances, not battles. Number 14, acknowledge common ground. Admitting shared points doesn't weaken your argument, it builds trust and opens the door for dialogue. 15, less is more. Don't overwhelm people with too many reasons. Lead with your strongest points to avoid diluting your argument. 16, reinforce freedom of choice. People resist when they feel controlled. Respect their autonomy by reminding them that the choice is theirs. 17, talk about the conversation. If emotions run high, step back and discuss the process. Express your feelings and ask if they share your frustrations. Section 3, collective rethinking. A, have more nuanced conversations. Complexify contentious topics. Polarizing issues aren't black and white. Treat them like prisms with many facets, not coins with two sides. 19, embrace caveats and contingencies. Acknowledging uncertainty and conflicting evidence doesn't weaken your credibility. It makes you more engaging and trustworthy. 20, expand your emotional range. Frustration and indignation are fine, but mix in curiosity, confusion, ambivalence to keep conversations productive. Section B, teach kids to think again. 21, host weekly myth-busting discussions. Debunking myths early helps kids embrace rethinking. Rotate topics like dinosaurs or space and let everyone take turns leading. 22, encourage multiple drafts. Teach kids the value of revising their ideas by having them create different versions of drawings or stories. Feedback helps them evolve their standards. 23, stop asking kids what they want to be. A single identity can limit possibilities. Instead, encourage them to explore many interests and roles. They don't have to be just one thing. Section C, create learning organizations. 24. Abandon best practices. Best practices imply perfection. Instead, focus on better practices by holding people accountable for improving processes, not just outcomes. 25. Establish psychological safety. Create a culture where people feel safe questioning the status quo. Leaders can model humility to set the tone. 26. Keep a rethinking scorecard. Don't just evaluate results, track how thoroughly options were considered. A good process with a bad outcome is a smart experiment, not a failure. In Section 4, stay open to rethinking your future. Number 27 of 30. Throw out the 10-year plan. Passions evolve, and so do you. Plan one step ahead to stay flexible and open to new opportunities. 28. Rethink actions, not just surroundings. Happiness isn't about where you are, it's about what you do. Focus on actions that bring meaning and purpose. 29. Schedule life checkups. Twice a year, reflect on your goals, beliefs, and progress. Are you learning and growing, or is it time to pivot? And 30 out of 30. Make time to think again. Dedicate time each week to rethinking and unlearning. Reach out to your challenge network and ask what ideas or habits you should reconsider. Rethinking isn't just a skill, it's a habit. Whether you're questioning your own beliefs, engaging in productive disagreements, or fostering a culture of learning, the key is to stay curious, humble, and open to change. This is the end of part 2 of Think Again by Adam Grant. It's a great book, and if you're interested in learning more, pick up a copy. That's where we'll leave it for this week. Thanks for joining. That's a wrap.